Okay, good morning or good afternoon, depending what time zone you're on. This is Jim Krieger, the Executive Director of Healthy Food America, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Thank you for joining this, where we'll be talking about implementation of sugary drink taxes. Healthy Food America is a national nonprofit organization, and we drive change in food policy and industry practice and raise public awareness to prevent the chronic diseases caused by poor nutrition. Our particular focus now is reducing excessive sugar consumption because sugar has emerged as a major risk factor for many chronic diseases. We also emphasize actions that address the health disparities in these conditions. If you want to learn more about us, go to our website, healthyfoodamerica.org, healthyfoodamerica.org, and there are many resources there for practitioners and advocates who are considering policies to reduce sugar consumption. There's a roadmap for sugary drink tax campaigns, summaries of the latest research on sugar health effects and sugar consumption and how to reduce sugar, and also updates on industry practices. But for today, we're going to be focusing on local sugary drink taxes. During the past year, we've had the privilege of working with many cities across the country to provide nonpartisan general technical support to their efforts to adopt sugary drink taxes through providing publicly available resources to them. In the coming months, 4 local jurisdictions, San Francisco, Oakland, Boulder, Colorado, and Cook County, Illinois, will implement their taxes, joining Berkeley, which began implementation in March 2015, and Philadelphia, which began implementation of its tax in January of this year, and Albany, California, which is just starting its process of implementation. As more and more cities and counties and states adopt sugary drinks tax policies, it's important to assure thoughtful and solid implementation. If done well, implementation can assure that sugary drink tax revenues are collected so that they can fund targeted community investments, that the stores, restaurants, and distributors that sell sugary drinks are clear about what's taxed, who pays, and how to pay, that the public is aware of what is taxed and why and how the funds will be used, and also solid implementation protects against industry litigation. Today, we'll learn from the pioneering approaches in Berkeley and Philadelphia as they have implemented their taxes. We're really fortunate to have an all-star panel today of Detchen Schering, Rosario Risch, Marissa Waxman, and Marcel Pratt to join us. The first presenters for the first 20 minutes will be Detchen and Rosario. Detchen is a health services program specialist at the City of Berkeley Public Health Division. One of her roles there is to implement the city's Healthy Berkeley program, which awards funds from the city's tax on sugary drinks. Detchen also staffs the city's sugar-sweetened beverage product panel of experts, which is the group that advises City Council on revenue allocation. Rosario Risch, also from Berkeley, is a revenue collection manager, and she's been working with the city for 17 years, and she's held positions as a revenue auditor, accountant, and revenue development officer. Next up, we'll have our colleagues from Philadelphia, Marissa Waxman and Marcel Pratt. Marissa serves as the first Deputy Revenue Commissioner for the City of Philadelphia, and she concentrates on revenue policy, regulation, and programs, as well as communications and intergovernmental affairs. Marcel is the chair of the litigation group at the City of Philadelphia Law Department. He oversees all litigation matters in the department and supervises on complex legal matters, serves as lead counsel in significant litigation, and provides guidance to the city in creating legal policy and strategy. So thank you so much to all 4 of you for joining us today. After we hear the presentations from our 2 sites, we'll move into a Q&A with all of you in the last 15 minutes of this presentation. As you're listening to the discussion, the presentations rather, please type your questions into the chat box you have on your screen. We'll note the themes as they emerge through the questions, then ask them to the panelists at the end. And we'll also send the link of the webinar recording to everybody who RSVP'd so you can access this later.
Hi, so I'm Marissa Waxman. I'm the first Deputy Revenue Commissioner with the City of Philadelphia. And we have also from Philadelphia, Marcel Pratt, who's from our law department. And I'm going to start by telling you how the Philadelphia Bev tax or the Philadelphia beverage tax is working, how we got it, and Marcel will tell you sort of how we're going to make sure that we get to keep it. So the Philadelphia beverage tax started on January 1st in 2017, and it's a 1.5 cent per ounce tax on the distribution of sweetened beverages. So it is when a distributor transfers the product to a retailer or a dealer for sale. And it also includes syrups and concentrates, and that is calculated not based on the volume of the syrup or concentrate, but the amount of finished beverage that it'll produce. And so then that 1.5 cent per ounce tax is applied to that amount of finished product that'll be produced from that. And what we're intending to do with the revenues is fund pre-K schooling, community schools, as well as improvements to the city's recreation centers, libraries, and parks. You'll also notice at the bottom of our screen is a website, www.philly.bevtax.com. And if you're looking for more information about the Philly Bev Tax, we highly recommend you go there. It's a wonderful site, and it's got information for a variety of different perspectives if you're a dealer, a distributor, or just a consumer who wants to know more. So the first thing we had to do was figure out exactly how much money a beverage tax at 1.5 cents per ounce would generate. And we did have to first figure out how this would impact consumption levels, and particularly taxable consumption. And using data from the University of Connecticut's Rudd Center, we were able to evaluate what the pre-tax consumption levels were. That was information they had available to us. And then what we had to do was determine what the price elasticity would be. We looked at a number of different studies and settled on a negative 0.1 price elasticity, which really means for every 1% that the price goes up, you would see a negative 1% drop in, you'd see a negative 1% towards the consumption. And so that helped us ultimately figure out that at 1.5 cents per ounce, based on the the cents per ounce in Philadelphia, we would expect a 27% drop in consumption. Also, when preparing our revenue estimates, we built in factors for non-compliance. And when we were looking at future years, we also had to factor in the fact that consumption of sweetened beverages is declining irrespective of a beverage tax. We needed to make sure we were accounting for that in the out years. When we were done with this, we came up with an estimate of $46 million in the first 6 months, which is our first fiscal year, and then annual collections of around $91 million in the subsequent years. And really that stays a bit steady, because while we think that there will be some decline in consumption in the out years, we also think we'll get better with our tax compliance and that it'll basically equal itself out. We are spending $1.8 million in the first year to implement the tax, and that will go down. A lot of that is one-time startup costs, and I'll talk to you a bit about where that $1.8 million goes and why it might actually be different for different communities. So just to give you a sense of the players involved, in Philadelphia, as I mentioned, this is a tax on distribution. It's not a sales tax. So sort of the first thing that has to happen is that a dealer has to notify their distributor that they're in Philadelphia, and the distributors are then registering and becoming the taxpayers for this. And what the distributors will do is pay the tax on everything that they sell to dealers. And we use the term dealers rather than retailers because we found that a lot of these sales happen in locations that you wouldn't traditionally think of as retail. They're in, college dining halls and hospitals and, law offices and all sorts of places. So we wanted to make sure we thought broader than just the term dealer, retailer. And so those distributors need to get registered, and they acknowledge back to the dealer that they got that, and then they begin adding they add that the tax was paid or the volume is distributed on the invoices. So dealers basically have two choices. They either A, can make sure that they're purchasing from a registered distributor, and they go through this notification process with them, or if for some reason they don't want to buy from a registered distributor, or they don't want the distributor paying on their behalf, then the dealers can file and pay directly. From a tax administration perspective, we absolutely want the distributors to be the ones filing and paying because it creates a much smaller universe of taxpayers, and that makes it a lot easier for us to keep track of. The piece about making sure that the distributors have the information added to those invoices, and they can do either the tax paid or the volume distributed on that invoice, is really critical to our enforcement down the line, so that when our field investigators show up at a retailer or a dealer's location and have to see the proof that they're complying with the law, those are the invoices that we're looking for. And those were really a lot of the questions that folks had in the beginning about how this would all work. And lastly, everyone should keep records. So to talk a bit about in Philadelphia, what is a sweetened beverage? It's any non-alcoholic beverage, syrup, or other concentrate that's used to prepare a beverage. And you can see the list of ingredients on the slide here. But really what's important to know about Philadelphia is that it's both sugar sweetened as well as artificially sweetened or other non-caloric sweeteners. And we found that in the process of doing this, that the language matters. There are some folks who take great exception to being referred to as artificial. So we tend to use non-caloric or artificial interchangeably. And just to give you examples of the types of beverages that are included, this is your sodas, any fruit drink that's not 100% juice, pre-sweetened coffees and teas, non-alcoholic beverages intended to be mixed into alcoholic drinks, energy drinks, sweetened waters. You'll find if you're going through this process that there are a whole lot of beverage categories that you may have never realized existed until you started doing this. And so equally important with what is a sweetened beverage is the discussion of what is not a taxable sweetened beverage for the Philadelphia beverage tax. The first is baby formulas. Even if those contain a sweetener, those are exempted. Medical foods, and that includes thickened beverages that have certain usages for folks who have difficulty swallowing. And for medical foods, what we tried to do as best we could was use federal definitions of what a medical food is. We get lots of questions around boost and ensure, and really it goes back to that federal definition, and folks have to sort of evaluate the products and their uses. Any product that's more than 50% milk is exempted from this tax, even if it's chocolate milk. And when we talk about milk, that includes all dairy milks. It also includes unsweetened nut and plant milks, as well as any milk product like a lactate that the USDA has determined to be nutritionally equivalent to milk. This is an area that does draw a lot of questions. And any product also that's more than 50% fresh fruit or vegetable at the time of retail sale is exempt from the tax. And also anything that the purchaser is adding themselves or can request the seller to add, that's exempt. And that also includes sort of your powdered drink mixes, your powdered iced teas, things like that, that the consumer is going to mix together themselves at home. And so to implement the tax, we really had to first work through the regulations. The legislation, provided a broad framework, but there was really a lot more questions that needed to be answered, both in terms of what was taxable and not taxable, the logistics of who pays, when they pay, how they file. And what we did was we convened an interdepartmental team from our revenue, law, and health departments, and we could not have done this with just any one department. It really required the input of all three to weigh in and work this through. The next thing around regulations was we engaged the industry experts early. Marcel will talk a little bit about the fact that there are some folks suing us, and that's not great. But what we found at the same time was that sort of their tax directors for a lot of those companies, they also knew that this was the law and that they wanted to be able to comply, and they actually were very helpful early on in the process in helping us design a system that would work. We had a number of hot button issues around how exactly the noticing between a distributor and dealer would work and what had to fit on an invoice, or just even the timing of the monthly tax return and payment. And there were a lot of things that, if we hadn't worked with the industry and just sort of rolled out the regulations and the procedures without their input, there would have been a lot more outcry. We had initially intended that this was a tax that would be due the 15th of the month. And we learned that the 15th was a tremendous problem for a number of the businesses. It didn't sync with how they were filing sales tax returns or other returns, and they wouldn't have the data in time. And they said, could you please push it back to the 20th of the month? And that actually made virtually no difference to us administratively. So by working with them early, we were able to accommodate their business processes and make sure that it would work smoothly at really no detriment to us. Some of the other hot button issues that we worked through during the regulation process was, what happens after the taxable transaction if something changes, if products are spoiled or stolen or donated to charity. And so there were a lot of questions there that we had to work through. And so for the regulations, there wasn't really any cost for that, or we didn't bring in any additional staff. It was really just convening existing staff and then reaching out to the industry. Now, IT was a different type of lift for us. And so we spent we had a budget of between $400,000 and $500,000 for our IT. I don't think that that will be necessary in every jurisdiction, but Philadelphia has a 32-year-old mainframe system that we use to track all of our taxes. And as a result, adding a new tax type to that 32-year-old system can be rather challenging. And as a result, it did take a decent amount of resources to get that done. At the same time, we built an online portal so that taxpayers would be registering, filing their monthly returns, and making their payments online. That was mandatory for this tax. And that was sort of a brand new portal. That was a much lesser expense. We stood it up initially for about $32,000. And now we're going back and we're going to be making some enhancements and spending a bit more on it, but we definitely got something functional up. And we wanted to make sure that we had that working well before the start date so that folks had time to register. The next thing that we spent time, effort, and money on was outreach. And so that has sort of two key parts to that. First, we had to identify the potential taxpayers. And we did that a couple of different ways. One, what we did was we combed our own business tax records, which includes NAICS code data, which tells you what industry each business is in, and tried to identify all those that were under classifications that seemed like they might be connected to the industry of selling sweetened beverages. We also hired a company that had done work in Berkeley, identifying potential taxpayers, and to have them use their sort of broader national knowledge about this industry to provide us with lists of potential taxpayers. And then, you know, some of it was just good old-fashioned thinking and Googling, where, you know, if we knew that there were some soda distributors or somebody saw a truck with a name on it driving by, we were sort of double checking the broad work we did to bring other folks in. And so once we thought we had a good sense of our potential taxpayers, which fell into sort of two groups, both the distributors and the dealers, those retailers, we had to really spread the message and make sure that they got the information. So we built the phillybevtax.com website. That was one of our first things. It's available in multiple languages. And it really tries to outline for both distributors and dealers what they need to do to be compliant. We also, to all the distributors that we identified, mailed fairly elaborate toolkits that provided them with information. We had street teams walking up and down commercial corridors across the city with toolkits for dealers, which included materials that they could post in their stores to help them explain this to their customers. So sort of vinyl clings going on coolers and little shelf dangly tabs to help explain, you know, the Philly Bev tax is here and exactly where all the money was going. And we had a number of trainings. We did office hour conference calls on a weekly basis for a while, where anybody with a question could sort of call in, get a sort of overview presentation, and then have some time for Q&A. And so here we spent around $400,000 on outreach. And then we also added a number of new positions to support this tax. We had a project coordinator as well as a communications coordinator, 3 customer service reps, and that's mainly to handle incoming calls and email questions, both how the tax works or with the logistics of how to file, how to make a payment. We have field investigators. Those are the folks who are out there now going into dealers and making sure that they're compliant, asking to see their invoices that demonstrate that they're buying from a registered distributor, or checking to see if they've signed up to file and pay us directly. And we've also added in some audit staff. So once we've got a couple more months of returns under our belt, we'll begin the audit process. And so far where we are is we have over 450 taxpayers registered. Most of those are distributors, but we do have some dealers who have signed up to pay us directly. We have had 3 months of collections and collected $19 million so far. That puts us on track to get $46 million by the end of our fiscal year. And enforcement, we really are just beginning to shift from education to enforcement, but our investigators have already visited over 5,000 dealers. At this point in the beginning phases, it was a very friendly, just, you know, telling people what it was that we'd be coming back to see in terms of those invoices. We're about to start the shift to really requiring that they produce those invoices, and there being progressive enforcement for folks who aren't able to comply with that. So the Philly Bev tax is here. We are fully operational and we're collecting money. So I'm going to turn it over to Marcel now.
Hi, everyone. This is Marcel Pratt. I'm the chair of litigation at the City of Philadelphia Law Department, and I'm going to talk about the opposition to the tax as well as the lawsuit. So we actually didn't get our tax passed on our first try. Philadelphia had actually tried twice before to get a beverage tax approved, pitching it primarily as a public health initiative with the added benefit of raising revenue. And both times, after intense lobbying from the soda industry, our city council rejected the proposals. So our next administration and our current mayor, Jim Kinney, tried again and focused on 3 initiatives: raising money for expanded pre-K, community schools, and a program called the Rebuild, which was a massive infrastructure investment in parks, libraries, and recreational centers. And the tax passed in city council in June of 2016 and went into effect on January 1st, 2017. So of those 3 initiatives, pre-K was the most important and most compelling. It's where the bulk of the tax revenue will go. And just so everyone understands, there is not free universal pre-K in Philadelphia. So the tax was an opportunity to fulfill a critical need. The first 2,000 seats were created in January 2017 at 88 pre-K programs across the city. The city actually has plans to create about 6,500 seats by the fall of 2020, but further expansion has been stalled due to the ongoing litigation that was initiated by the American Beverage Association, which I'll talk about in a little bit. The second initiative, community schools, very generally, those are public schools where a full-time coordinator works with the entire school community to address some of the pressing needs of the community. So they work on issues such as getting access to medical services, job training, and after-school programming. The last initiative was Rebuild. As I said earlier, Rebuild was an initiative to improve recreational centers, playgrounds, and libraries across the city. It's actually a $500 million initiative that will be supported by both public and private funds. It's the largest infrastructure investment in the city's history. However, it is on hold and can't be fully implemented until the litigation is resolved. More specifically, there's $300 million in bond funding that the city can't access while the beverage tax is pending. Next slide. So pre-enactment lobbying and campaigning. The American Beverage Association spent about $10 million in 2016 trying to persuade lawmakers and members of the public to oppose the tax. And I'm sure the numbers have gone up since then. These were numbers for 2016. And on the city side, Philadelphians for a Fair Future, a group that's comprised of a diverse set of organizations in the educational space, nonprofits, health-minded organizations. They spent about $2 million on pro-tax efforts. Next slide. So the litigation, I can't say too much about our litigation strategy or discuss the arguments because the case is still pending. But I can give you a sort of a brief overview of where things stand and what's happened to date. So in September 2016, the American Beverage Association filed a lawsuit seeking to invalidate the tax in the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas, which is our trial court. And to give you a sense of timing, that was approximately 3 months after the tax passed in City Council. The Beverage Association hired the largest corporate law firm in Philadelphia, which is also one of the largest firms in the country. And they also hired one of the most well-known plaintiffs' personal injury firms in the city. The primary issue in the litigation is whether the tax, even though it's paid directly by distributors and not consumers, operates like a retail sales tax and therefore is or is not preempted by the state sales tax. And so along with the complaint to initiate the lawsuit, the Beverage Association also filed a King's Bench petition with the state Supreme Court. And a King's Bench petition is a request to the Supreme Court to allow the parties to skip over all of the lower courts in order to get finality quicker. The city joined in part in the request. The city wanted finality as soon as possible as well, but the city also wanted time to conduct a little bit of discovery because the Beverage Association had included a massive record with their complaint, including a very lengthy analysis from an expert. The Supreme Court, however, denied the request, and so we proceeded in the trial court. And in December 2016, the trial court dismissed the lawsuit in its entirety and ruled completely in favor of the city. The Beverage Association then appealed to the Commonwealth Court, which is an intermediate appellate court here in Pennsylvania. The city then filed its own King's Bench petition with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, so this was the second one. And this time, the arguments were a little bit different. We argued that we needed finality in order to go to the bond market to, for example, get the bond funding for the rebuild program, as well as to fully implement the other two programs, because with the litigation hanging over the city, we couldn't responsibly spend the money as we had initially planned. The Supreme Court denied the city's King's Bench petition, so we just proceeded in the Commonwealth Court. The court did put us on an expedited briefing schedule. It held argument on April 5th, so just last month. And usually a case is heard before a panel of 3 judges, but the Commonwealth Court recognized the importance of this case and decided to hear it en banc, so before a panel of 7 judges. And we don't know when to expect a decision, but we are looking forward to it. Next slide.
Sorry. I'm trying.
So this is the current situation. $19 million collected so far. The pre-K program, which is called PHL Pre-K, is going very well. The last that I heard, over 93% of the seats were filled, which is a terrific number given the usual turnover associated with things like families relocating and changing jobs, et cetera. Community schools, the city has launched 9 community schools, which are serving around 4,500 city residents. In rebuild, there is a little bit of planning that's going on, but as mentioned, the initiative can't happen until the litigation is resolved, because the city needs access to the bond funding. Next slide. And so that's the end of what I have to say. And for more information on the tax, you can visit the tax website, phillybevtax.com, or you can go to phila.gov to get more information about the programs that are being funded by the tax.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Marcel and Marissa. We've got questions coming in, so just reminding folks to keep sending those questions in the chat box, and then we will get back to those after we hear from our colleagues in Berkeley. So with that, I will turn it over to Detchen and Rosaria. Okay, are you with us, Detchen? Yep, we're getting the audio now. Okay, you guys are on.
Okay. Hi, can you hear us?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. This is Detchen Siring. I'm so sorry for the technical problems in my office. So I'm here at in the other office with Rosario Ritchie. Rosario.
Hi, this is Rosario Ritchie.
So thank you. So we will begin. I will just give a brief beginning, and then Rosario will pick up from there for a few slides about the finance roles, etc. Are we in control of the slides, Sarah, or are you controlling it? Hello?
I'm going to be, hi, I'm moving them forward.
Oh, yeah, if we can go to the very first. So we will be presenting Berkeley experience of implementing this tax now for a couple of years, and give you some overview of some of the how we're doing it, how we're implementing it, some of the challenges, also about the panel of experts commission that was formed as part of the tax mandate, as well as talking about some of the funding, and end with some lessons learned. As a quick background, I am from the Public Health Division, managing the implementation of the sugar sweetened beverage tax, more so from the community grants aspect, so more of the grants management. And Rosario is our Deputy Finance Director here, and we'll be talking more about the financial and tax collection aspect of it. So the first slide, so this is, I think everybody on this call probably knows already, but just a quick glance at the global public health challenges. As we know, obesity, diabetes, due to sugar sweetened beverages and tooth decay also is a major public health crisis, particularly obesity and diabetes. And there's ample evidence, scientific evidence now that links with, all of these chronic diseases with the consumption of sugary beverages. And so the tax in Berkeley was really unlike in Philly, where it passed, as a revenue generation. Here in Berkeley, we did manage to pass it as a public health ordinance. And then we also know that sugary beverages is source of calories, largest source of calories for youth in the U.S. And here in Berkeley, it's seen that most of our ninth graders at Berkeley High School are either obese or overweight, and so this is a major concern for our small community in Berkeley as well. And there's been millions, as the previous presenters mentioned, millions spent on marketing, and marketing particularly to the populations that we are particularly addressing, which are the lower income Latino, African American populations here, and particularly this is a quote. I don't know if you can see it very clearly. I can't really. That came out just after the first implementation of our taxes was put in place, and so it was reassuring that WHO was also really supporting increase in pricing of sugary beverages. So I'm going to pass it on to Rosario as she speaks about the next slide. Oops, I think we're going backwards now.
Rosario, we're pulling up the slides now, but why don't you can start talking and we'll be up in a minute.
All right.
Oh, there it is. Great.
All right. So we have adopted our ballot on November 2014. This ordinance had passed. And imagine we have to basically implement this within a 2-month period of time. A month to put it together, and then the following month to actually start collecting. So we were faced with a big challenge of how to do this. This is basically the first city that passed it. So we were unsure on how to go about it, collecting that 1 cent per ounce. What we did was immediately we partnered with a third-party contractor to do a lot of brainstorming and see how we can do it we can collaborate the collection of the tax. There were 2 factors in collecting this tax. First, you have a distributor, which is mostly our National Beverages Association, and then you've got self-distributors, which means your mom and pop store, restaurants within your locals. We immediately were able to identify that and knew that that would be a challenge for us going forward. One of the things that we really wanted to clarify, if you look at the next slide, is that there are exemptions to this tax. So we want to make sure that it is communicated that anything that is natural or common sweeteners, they are exempted from the tax, and to make sure that retailers with less than 100,000 gross receipts are also exempted from this tax. This is something that we are doing because we do not really want to hit the mom and pop stores that are not making, or they're only making below 100,000. So that's one of the things that we included in our ordinance. So knowing what our challenges are, we knew that we have to do two phases, given the fact that we have to turn this around within a month. So we said, let's go and do phase 1 and phase 2. Our phase 1 is actually where we actually communicated to the distributors. We sent out notices along with our contractor, and we also invited them for a taxpayer education day wherein they sent all their representatives. The city was represented by, of course, our city manager, our city attorney, our finance director, our revenue collection team, our PIO, Public Information Officer. We were all there to answer any questions that they may have. That worked out really well. They came in prepared. They have difficult questions, but most of the questions were answered to where it clarified it. Our city attorney made sure that he was able to identify what is actually subject to tax and what's not subject to tax. After that, we actually decided that we will make this tax collection effective March 2015, which means they will be collecting from we will be collecting from the distributors starting March 15, and we got our money started coming in April. After we were done with that, we went into our phase 2, which is the self-distributors. This required a whole lot more effort because we are trying to reach out to the locals, making sure that they know what are the grounds for this tax. We have actually had several workshops. Sadly enough, we did not have as big of a turnout as we want, but the word is out there because they all got notices that the taxpayer is there. For this phase 2, we actually got about 131 taxpayers, and we still are trying to identify more. We use our databases available to us since now you're talking locals. What is our role as finance department when it comes to the implementation of this tax? We are responsible for the project management for this contractor that we're working with. We made sure that we are approving all communication to our taxpayer to make sure that they are carrying forward what this tax is for. What's different is, the difference is that the community already bought into this before we even start implementing it. It was based mainly for a lot of health. It's our concern towards health and funding health programs. So immediately we did not get a lot of resistance when it comes to that. We make sure that the money gets into the city's bank. We also created the forms for them. There are so many, one of the things we don't want to do is once our businesses out here is to create a consistency in our forms. So we made sure that we are communicating that the soda tax the way sweetened beverage tax, the same way we are communicating all of our other taxes. Going forward, we are thinking of putting more effort into making sure we sustain this tax. our revenues is about $3,169,376.87. We on the first year, we only had 3 months, so we only got 242,000. So unlike Philly, we're small potatoes, but I think it's the matter of knowing that this tax really geared towards the sentiments of the community. They really want to get with this and really want to have these programs. You can tell that it started to go up. And in FY 2017, we seem to see part of it declining, just like the challenges that Philly is looking at, is that naturally, if you're taxing it, if you're putting a lot of efforts into this, you would expect that consumption will go down. As far as implementation, we are now looking into having some audits to make sure that the tax is being implemented the way we wanted to do it, and then kind of be able to monitor it. And that's also part of the city's role, is to make sure that we're reviewing all those reports coming through from our third party. As far as cost, as I told you, we actually contracted with another company, and what we pay for is really 2% based on collections. Next slide. We would need the next slide. That's it. All right. So, so that was the cost for the contractor. For city staff and operations, we had a program staff that will actually administer all the programs to make sure that they're carried forward the way our panel of experts wanted to get them carried. And as far as finance, we have quarter of an FTE, and we're planning to do more, because now that we're at the end where we have enough data, we are trying to beef up our resources to make sure that this tax keeps going. And at least it's implemented correctly. Audits will cost us about $5,000 per audit. That's our plan of costs going forward. I'll turn it over to Gretchen for more of the public health.
Gretchen, we've got about 4 more minutes left for this part of the presentation.
Okay, so public health division role is pretty much, managing the contracts from the distribution. Next, we can just go to the next slide. So one of the ordinance, what it established in addition to the tax is the commission. The Panel of Experts Commission, which essentially is the body that advises the council on how to utilize the funds that have been generated from the tax. And these council members commission members have to be Berkeley residents, and they applied for the position. Forward, please. On this slide, I don't know if it shows up very clearly on your screen, but it's essentially a table of some of the agencies that have been receiving funds, and a distribution, percentage of the funds distributed to those agencies, as well as some of the contracts such as media, education. We're a small city, so we have nowhere near the kinds of revenue that Philly showed us. We're talking about, between 1 to 2 million per year. So our resources are also fairly limited in that sense. But we are nonetheless really following the ordinance in terms of funding community-based organizations to reduce SSB consumption. Next slide, please. So at Jim's recommendation, wanted to sample some of the programs, what they're doing. For instance, Healthy Berkeley, Healthy Black Families is working on Thirsty for Change program that is working with youth, as well as creating and training water ambassadors among the population that they work with. Ecology Center, likewise, works a lot with youth in the African American Latino communities. And the Y is another organization that's working on reducing obesity as well as preventing diabetes, particularly among First Start early child programs. So those are some examples. Next slide, please. Signs of success, as many of you are aware, there's been research done on the decreases in consumption of SSBs in Berkeley, with 21% showing in the first year, which is very exciting news. And water consumption actually increasing in Berkeley, but also in our neighboring cities. Just more recently, Public Health Institute came up with this very good news about volume decrease in Berkeley of the sales of sugar sweetened beverages, and also no increase in overall grocery bills. And this was from some 15 million grocery checkout receipts. So this is actually just to prove that it's not a grocery bill, and as was put forward in some of the campaigns. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges, communication, as Rosario pointed out, we did really try hard to communicate prior to implementing the tax, but also we have more work on that. And as part of our effort to communicate to the public how the resources are being used or revenues are being used, we have created the website called healthyberkeley.com. And that is the new sort of branding of the sugar sweetened beverage program, so to speak, because really our whole ordinance was based on creating a healthy Berkeley community. Larger distributors not wanting to implement, city attorney has been very involved in clarifying a lot of the questions that have come up. We really started with our city business license database, so that was sort of our starting point. We have very little staffing for this program. As you saw, it's essentially one staff at the public health office and a half a staff yet to be appointed at the finance office. So we're about 1.5, and it's slightly more sort of work needs to be done on our outreach. And so we're looking into that through possibly internships, etc. Next,
Gretchen, we're getting ready to go on to questions, so if you can wrap it up in another few seconds there.
Yes. Next slide. We'll be just outlining the lessons learned. I've already mentioned a couple of them. Essentially, I think the main thing that we learn is, we really need to factor in staffing right from the get-go, both in the different interdepartments that we work with, and serve as a resource for other jurisdictions. The good news being that now we're not alone. There's many other resources in other jurisdictions that are passing this. So we are actually beginning to learn from some of the others that are implementing this. Next slide, please. Just some examples of media campaigns that we have just launched in Berkeley through the utilization of some of this resource. Let's Drink Water is a program that we just used. These are on buses, at bus stations, and on billboards here around Berkeley. And next, the last slide, please. And here are some examples of the campaign and also some of the educational material that we have used some of these resources for through the Public Health Division. Thank you.
Great. And thank you very much, Gretchen and Rosario, for a great presentation showing us how the implementation is being rolled out in Berkeley. So we have many questions here at this point, and we're not going to have time for all of them. What we will do is we will see if we can get our panelists to respond to them offline, and then we will circulate those with the answers with those of you who are participating in our webinar today. But let me just pose a couple of questions in the time we have remaining. One of the questions was focused on industry opposition to the tax in Philadelphia, less so apparently in Berkeley. And one of the main arguments that's come up in the opposition is the cost to dealers and distributors. How much are the costs to these dealers and distributors? What is the impact on jobs, and how do we address job loss? So maybe if you could talk to both Philly and Berkeley, are there job losses? How are you addressing that? Is it adversely affecting small businesses, and how are you helping them out?
Oh, hi, this is Marissa from Philadelphia. In terms of job or the sort of negative impacts of administering the tax and existing here, we do think it's still pretty early to assess this. We are seeing that a lot of businesses are making different choices. Some are absorbing the tax, some are passing it along to consumers. So we've talked to a lot of economists who said really in under a year, you really can't begin to assess what those impacts are. Now, we've seen a lot of the industry saying, certain companies are saying, we've done layoffs in the Philadelphia region, and then they said, oh, wait, it wasn't actually layoffs. It turns out they, that they just weren't filling vacant positions. And it's interesting because those same organizations have been doing layoffs nationwide, but somehow attributing it in Philadelphia solely to our beverage tax. So we do think it's pretty early in Philadelphia to assess how that's going, but it is something we're monitoring. But there are two things I want to mention. One is at the same time that we implemented the Philadelphia beverage tax, we also implemented a healthy beverage tax credit against our local business tax. And so that is a tax credit available to certain dealers who are increasing their sales or actually just their purchases of healthy beverages intended for retail sale. So we were addressing it through that. And then finally, it's also important to remember that there's a lot of job creation going on, particularly at those pre-Ks that already tend to be locally owned, often minority owned or women owned businesses, and we've seen a lot of expansion there. So there have been a lot of positive economic impacts already that we can see, but it's too early to really make an assessment of the broader economic impacts of the tax itself.
And just to follow up on that, the city is excited about the job growth that will result from the tax. As I mentioned earlier, PHL Pre-K has opened up at 88 sites across the city, which has resulted in a number of jobs added to the local economy. And Rebuild, once we're actually able to implement it fully, again, is a $500 million investment that will result in a wide range of jobs across a variety of sectors that will benefit the local economy.
I think, so in Berkeley, I know that, we haven't done any research on job loss or impact on that, but I know Public Health Institute has been working with one of our departments here on Economic Development Department on putting out a report soon. Since it's not yet published, I am not at liberty to share the details of it, but I believe it is good news and not the anticipated job losses that the beverage industry may be pointing out at. But that should be out soon by Public Health Institute and possibly the City of Berkeley.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I think our time is up. It's now noon Pacific time. We appreciate the great presentations from our panelists, and we will be posting the webinar online if you want to review some of this in more detail. And both our sites have shared their websites with you to get further information. If you want to get further webinar announcements or get on our mailing list at Healthy Food America, you can go to our website and sign up there as well. And thank you again to the panelists. They did a great job. And thanks for everybody who's participated for the thoughtful questions. And so with that, we will end our webinar, and good afternoon.